I was a house slave. And they had a label for that called contraband. Back then it meant captured slave forced into service. After the Civil War, job opportunities for freed slaves and other African Americans were next to none. There just weren't any. So you know, I was determined. I was going to have a brighter life for me. One day, I had been preparing a long time. I joined the U.S. Army, the 38th Infantry. It was a cold day. I was dressed in my warm clothes. You know, I was tall, 5 feet 9 inches. And back then, they had no examinations to get into the Army. I had to learn to be a marksman with a perfect eye and an aim that you could not believe. I thought for sure I wasn't good.
Or just talk louder.
One day, I got sick, and I had to go to the infirmary. There, my identity was really revealed, because you see, my name is Kathy Williams, the only documented female Buffalo soldier.
Thank you, Private Daigle. You may get a stripe next week for that. Ladies, give yourself a hand. Don't let that get away. You're just as tough as these guys. Pat yourself on the back. Before I turn the microphone over to Sergeant Bell for his part of the presentation, I want to explain to you, how did these men get this name, Buffalo Soldier?
I didn't understand that.
How did these men get the name Buffalo Soldier? You can use that. That's going to be on the test, so you can, if you know, keep it. They didn't wake up one morning and say, hey, we'd be Buffalo Soldiers. No. As Sergeant Bell said, most of them were slaves. They'd never seen a buffalo. There are 3 theories as to how these men got the name Buffalo Soldier. One is when the Native Americans first came across this strange and different and new-looking soldier, they noticed that the hair on the head of the soldier resembles the hair between the horns of the buffalo. Thus, Buffalo Soldier. The second theory is when they were in Montana and they were riding across the prairie, they covered themselves in buffalo robes in temperatures that was 10 degrees below zero. From a distance to the Native American, they looked like buffalo. But as they got closer and closer and closer, they realized they were not buffalo at all. They were this new kind of soldier called Buffalo Soldier. Sergeant Bell, are you ready? Not yet?
Not quite.
All right. You know, the army moves on its stomach. And think about this. When the Buffalo Soldiers and the cavalry came west, there were no safe ways. Not that you can afford to go there today. There were no McDonald's. There was no Burger King. The Army had to come up with a food supply that would work in 110 degrees weather and minus 10 degrees weather. A supply that wouldn't spoil. So they came up with 3 staples for the soldiers. One, we all know about that, coffee. Coffee beans don't spoil. As long as they're not wet, they don't spoil. They needed the coffee because the water out here was so bad. Remember, it was not purified. They got it where it was. So the coffee helped cure the taste. Second was beans. Beans don't spoil. It can be 110 degrees, beans are still beans. It can be minus 20 degrees, beans are still beans. And when they're on campaign, they would take what is known as hardtack. This was a biscuit that they could carry in their saddlebags, and it would last for years. As a matter of fact, this is almost 18 years old, and it's still hard and good. I wouldn't eat it because about 15,000 children had their hands on it, but it's still good to eat if you choose to eat it. The most important piece of equipment that a soldier has is his horse. The mount is more important than the trooper. The trooper can be replaced, but you can never replace a good horse. We know we lose one, and it takes us almost 6 weeks to recover. It's important because the horse is a lot smarter than a human. They get it going, especially in what we do. So when the soldiers were out riding around on campaign, when they'd stop for the night, the first thing they did was take care of their mount. Now you have a saddle on the horse and a blanket all day long, and his back gets sweaty and dust get underneath it and it get dirty, and you get off of him, and if you take the saddle off and let him go and try to saddle him up the next day, he's gonna have a sore back. And guess what you're gonna have to do? Walk, and these boots ain't made for walking. So what they would do is they would get what is called a curry comb, and they'd break up all of that dirt on the back of the horse. All of that dirt. And once they got that broke off, they take the horse brush and brush that dirt off. So his back is nice and clean. So when they mounted him the next day, they could ride him and they wouldn't have to walk. And when they went through water or rocks, they would stop occasionally, and they would use what we call a hoof pick. The hoof pick is designed to clean the horse's hoof. Because if you get a rock in there and you walk on him long enough, he's going to limp. Now you can't ride him. And now what are you going to have to do? And you don't want to walk. A lot of people believe that, well, let me get to this first. When they camped at night, they just didn't get out their horses, clean them up, and let them go. What do you think would happen if you just turn them out in the green pasture? See ya. So what they would do is they would have what is called a hobble. They put the hobble on the front leg of the horse, and then they could turn him loose in the green valley. And the horse could eat all night because you couldn't take food with you. There were no semi-trucks. So when you were on campaign, it was you and the element and the horse. That way you can catch it the next day. As you saw in that quick video, you saw us shoot on both horseback and on foot. Don't believe the music. Don't believe the movies at all. 85 to 90% of the time, even the cavalry fought on foot. Why? Because if your horses were exposed, the Native Americans would shoot them. They were smart enough to know that if you can't ride, you can't catch them. So what happens when you decided to get into battle, every fourth trooper would take a horse, and this is called a link strap. All of the horses had this on them. You'd hook 3 horses, then the trooper would take those 3 horses to the rear, and then you fought up front. I want to tell you a story about a soldier. He's not a Medal of Honor winner, but he epitomizes how the Native American came up with the name Buffalo Soldier. This soldier's name was Private John Randall. happened in 1867. John Randall, the commander, told him to accompany 2 hunters out to get meat for the fort. Not long after they left, the hunters became the huntee. They were attacked by approximately 7 Cheyenne warriors. Immediately, the 2 hunters were killed. John Randall got his mount shot from underneath it, but he managed to crawl underneath a washed out railroad bed. And there Randall took his stand. He fought for 30 minutes before help arrived. And when help arrived, they discovered that John Randall had 11 lance wounds. But he refused to stop fighting. The word spread as fast all over the Cheyenne Nation that this new kind of soldier, who when wounded, mortally wounded, refused to stop fighting. And yes, he had shaggy hair, like the hair between the horns of the buffalo. When they were in battle, we had a little discussion on that. As I said, no microphones. The way they communicated was with this little item here, who always stayed close to the officer. You want to know what this is? A bugle. You're absolutely right. And the bugler had to know every tune the officer ordered, and the troopers had to know. So it was very complicated compared to what we have today. You get to the microphone and say, "Hey, John, come over here." Then they just blew a horn, and you got to go, "Oh, that's what that means. Let me go over here."
Bet they knew the one for child.
Or they weren't deaf. You'd be in trouble. Generally, when the Buffalo Soldiers and cavalrymen, either one, went out on campaign, when I say campaign, it's like a scouting maneuver out 5 to 7 days where they had coffee, beans, and hardtack. They'd be out there 7 days, 5 to 7 days, and they return back to camp. Now, this uniform, 7 days, not gonna smell real good. And as Private Daigle said, there weren't many jobs for ladies during that time. You were either married a farmer, married a hotel owner, worked in a saloon, or you became a wash lady and you worked at the fort. Worked for 2 reasons. One, you are protected as a female if you're at the fort. No one's going to attack you at the fort. So when the soldiers would come back, they would give them their uniforms and they would wash them. Some of you ladies may know what this is. This is a scoreboard. Yes, that's how they get the sweat and the dirt and all the other stuff out of it. After they would do that, they had what they call, this is modern technology in some places. It's a ringer. And if they were lucky enough to have a clothesline, they could hang them on the clothesline, but if they didn't, they put them on tree branches, brush, anywhere they can so they can dry out. Once that was done, they had the almighty eye. But things got better for those ladies, trust me. Because what happened the next shot was the steamer. You put the embers in here, the water in there. When the water trickled down, hit the embers, steam came out, and they were able to iron the uniform. And the amazing soap, good for all occasions, clothes, face, horses, Lysol, animal fat, and lye. Cleans you well, so well sometimes it takes your skin off.
Modern day cosmetic.
Yes, ma'am. I want to talk about a soldier. As John said earlier, and I said earlier, The Buffalo Soldiers were primarily African American soldiers commanded by white officers. When a white officer chose to command a black regiment, he got an automatic raise in rank. The State Department did that because they wanted experienced officers commanding the troops. Each regiment had their own chaplain whose job not only was to save their souls, but to educate them, which was a primary reason why a lot of them joined the Army, so that they could learn to read, write, and count. This one officer was offered the 9th Cavalry. He chose not to command the 9th Cavalry. He chose the 7th Cavalry. This officer's name was George Armstrong Custer. And we all know what happened to the 7th Cavalry. And to this day, the 9th Cavalry is so glad he chose the 7th and not the 9th.
How could he choose the 7th over the 9th if he was assigned to the 9th? Why?
No, it was voluntary.
Oh.
Yeah, you were assigned to a white unit. Most of the white officers did not want to command black troops because they thought politically it was incorrect. But after about 10 years and they found out how well they fought, that was no longer a problem. They were glad to be there, and I'll tell you a story about a couple of them in a little bit that saved a few people's bottoms as the war went along. So, as I said, they had chaplains because they couldn't read or write. So, just give an example. When they got back to the fort after being on campaign, they would play cards. What's wrong with these cards? No numbers, no need no numbers, because they didn't know what numbers were. But they knew that these 4 spots was bigger than this one spot, and that's how they played. They didn't say this is a 4 and this is an 8. They just say, that's bigger than that, I win, which is all right. It worked. I want to show you a good example of horses and how horses differ. The Buffalo Soldier horses, as well as the horses that we have, wear these shoes. Now, a horse's hoof is like your fingernail. You trim them, you can nail into them to protect their feet. You see the difference in shapes? This one is a little rounder and this one is shaped a little differently.
Yeah.
Why? Because this is the front shoe. This is the rear shoe. And if you look at this mount right here, if we cut him in half, move over, Custer. Gotta get Custer out of there. You all done, brother. Got it. Can you get him? Because my gloves don't work.
I'll get him.
If you cut the horse in half, you can see that the front end is much bigger, larger, heavier than the rear end. And that also happened in the horses that we call 18-wheelers. Same shape. Front shoe, rear shoe. You know, there were 22 Buffalo soldiers who received the Medal of Honor. And I want to talk about 3. You ever heard of the Seminole Indian Scouts? No. Have you ever heard of the Trail of Tears? Seminole Indian Scouts came from the Trail of Tears. They were escaped slaves who moved down into the Everglades and joined in with the Seminole Indians who opened their arms and accepted them, married them, integrated them. And then President Jackson came down and moved all of those Indians, Native Americans, from Florida to Oklahoma. Well, the Seminole Indians look much like the slaves. They knew there was no way they could stay at Oklahoma and not get captured and taken back to slavery. So they migrated down into Mexico and established themselves down there. During that time, they learned how to hunt. They learned where the bad guy lived. They knew where the water was. They knew how to hide. They were excellent trackers. So when the army came west in the area of Texas, there were no maps. You know, they got out there just like you get out of your car and place you don't know and go, where am I? And then you go out on campaign and you get shot at and you can't catch the bad guys because they hiding from you before you even get there. So they figured out they needed someone who knew the territory, who can lead them and guide them around so that they wouldn't get bushwhacked. So they went down to Mexico and brought back the Seminole Indians. They promised the Seminole Indians land and money if they would scout for them. One day, the Seminole Indian and their lead officer, his name was John Bullis. John Bullis was a Civil War veteran. He commanded colored troops during the Civil War. He was the perfect leader for the Seminole Indian Scout. John Bullis went into the commanding officer's office and the officer told him, I want you to go and bring back 80 horses that have been stolen. So John Bullis chose John Ward, Pompey Factor, Isaac Payne. And he had the 5th Infantry, a company of 5th Infantry behind him. And off they went. The first day, they covered 8 miles. John Bullis talked with his troops that night and said, we can't do this. So the next morning, when he got up, he and the 3 Seminole Indian scouts headed straight north. Remember, no roads, no road signs, no maps. What they were looking for called cutting a trail. That first day, 18 miles they covered. And they camped on this nice, beautiful knoll with water running and nice grass. Why do you think they was on the knoll with water? For the horses. The next morning they got up, or at least that night, they had what you call a hot camp. They had beans, they had coffee, and they had hardtack. Great meal. The next night, they went north by northwest. The next morning before day, another 15 miles. No sign. They camped in a nice little valley next to a stream. But they had a cold camp that night. They felt that they were getting close to their objective. The next morning they got up early and they headed straight west again. And about noon, they started to hear noises. Sounds like animals. They cut across the trail and it looked like there were the same number of animals they were looking for. So they followed it within 100 yards. And then they dismounted. And they tethered their horses. And they started to get closer and closer and closer. And they looked up and there they were. They were only guarded by 8 bad guys. Well, John Bullis, being a cavalryman, said, let's go, boys. We got them outnumbered. And they attacked. And he was right. For the first 35 minutes, they had control of the herd. Then on the hill, there showed up another 25 bad guys. And then they had to retreat. They were retreating, and they were fine, and they were retreating. There was a lot of confusion and screaming and hollering. They went and got to their horses, and they took off. The 3 soldiers went up the hill full speed. And as they went up the hill, they looked back down, and there was poor John Bullis. His horse had panicked and ran away from him. And John was left there, and people was coming around and the bad guy was getting ready to surround him. John Ward looked back and he noticed that. And he stopped the other two and said, "Come on, boys, we can't leave the lieutenant." Swirled their horses around. Down the hill they went. They picked up the lieutenant, carried him to safety. The only damage that they had, John Ward's rifle stock received a bullet. But they escaped, went back to the 5th Infantry. 2 weeks later, they caught up with him and they did eventually get the animals. But for John Ward, Pompey Factor, and trumpeter Isaac Payne, because of their heroics during that particular battle, they received the Medal of Honor. Now that's nice, but they would have preferred to receive the Meritorious Award. Is that right, John? Yes, because that came with $1 a month extra pay. The medal just walks around on your chest. But if you get a chance, here are the Seminole Indian Scouts, and you can see those who received the medal on it, has them above them. Are you ready now, Mr. Bell? Are you enjoying me talking? All right. I want to introduce John Bell, our President and CEO.
Well, I certainly can't top Fred in what he presented to you, but what my job is today is to try to bring this to kind of a conclusion. We want to put all the pieces together about the Buffalo Soldiers and black men in the military. Before I do that, I'd like to talk about a group of men who were lost on the Staked Plains. They were Buffalo Soldiers in 1877. And they were on the Staked Plains, which is in West Texas and eastern New Mexico, is the Llano Estacado. They were called the Staked Plains because the early missionaries staked out the water holes on the Staked Plains. And they were lost. A cavalry unit under Captain Nicholas Dolan, Company A, 10th Cavalry, along with some buffalo hunters, were lost on the Staked Plains because they're looking for a horse that had been stolen. And the soldiers looking for the horses, and they ran into the buffalo soldiers, buffalo hunters. Buffalo soldiers, buffalo hunters. Let me get this right. They ran across the buffalo hunters who also were lost, looking for water. So together these men were on the Staked Plains for 86 hours without water. The first day, they got cotton mouth. They felt like they couldn't breathe. And their lips started to crack. No water. And they pushed on. A soldier fell from his horse. Another soldier ran over, picked that soldier up, and put him back on the horse. And they pushed on. Then, one day, the second day, a horse just fell to his knees. A soldier grabbed his knife, jumped off his horse, cut the horse's throat, and he drank the blood. And it made him sick. But they had to push on. The third day, one of the horses just stopped in his tracks. And he spread his legs. And the horse started to urinate. A soldier grabbed his cup, ran over, and had a drink. The man was trying to survive. He would do anything necessary to survive. The officer in charge said, "Men, next time your horse does that, grab your cup and put sugar in it." And they pushed on. Finally, after 86 hours, they found water. But they lost 4 buffalo soldiers and 1 buffalo hunter. True story. Happened in 1877 in July in drought conditions. Company A, commanded by Captain Nicholas Nolan. That's one of the stories of the Buffalo Soldiers. My job today is to round this up, bring it to an end, but we didn't talk about the uniform. The uniforms that we have are dark blue. The trousers are sky blue. Why are they sky blue? Because the Army says they're sky blue. And if the Army says they're sky blue, they are sky blue. You got it. The coat is dark blue. The hat is black, not white. That hat was introduced in the movies by John Ford for John Wayne and not the United States Army. Now, if you look at my hat, I don't have my yellow band around my hat because when I took my hat out of the hat box, the yellow band stayed in my hat box. So I am out of uniform because I don't have, and I didn't want to bring that up because we get on the guys all of the time, and I'm the guy who gets on them for not being in uniform. And I was going to try to pass that by you, but I thought that my first sergeant would already know that, so I'm going to hear about it when I get out of here today. Because I ride the guys all the time about that. You got to be in uniform. Now, the stripes on our uniforms are yellow because we're cavalry. If they are blue or white stripes, we are infantry. If they are red, we are artillery. If they are green, we're medical staff. If they are orange, did I say that?
No, you didn't say orange.
Signal Corps. The Signal Corps. So those are the colors that they wore during that time period. Now, we think about the battles that the Buffalo Soldiers were in, and in Colorado, they were stationed at Fort Lyons. They were stationed at Fort Garland. And what they did in Colorado, the Santa Fe Trail ran through Colorado. And their job was to take care of the Santa Fe Trail. And they had, the Santa Fe Trail came out of Kansas, went through Colorado, and they had Fort Lyons to guard it. Fort Lyons, the guys at Fort Lyons guarded from that area cleared to the mountain pass, which is Raton Pass. And then from Raton Pass, it goes into New Mexico that went down through Fort Union, and the soldiers at Fort Union guarded that. And that was the 9th Cavalry. So they guarded that area. And we also have some major battles that they were in. The battle at Milk Creek, which was the battle that started at Meeker's Indian Agency. The White River Agency was commanded by Nathan Meeker. And he wanted to make the Utes, who are used to hunting and scouting, he wanted to make them farmers. And they couldn't do the farming. And he was going to make them farmers no matter what. And it kind of got into a minor argument with a sub-chief. And that created the White River War. And we call it the Meeker Massacre. That happened in 1877. There were about 300 Native Americans who left the agency. And they sent down a troop from Fort Steele, commanded by Major Thornburg. And when he came across and got near the agency, he decided to go in. And when he took his troops in, he had about 200 men with him. When he took them in, and as soon as he crossed the line, he was killed. Got shot in the head. Was killed as he went through. And he had 200 men with him, but they were fighting 300 of the Native Americans who were up above them. And they were shooting down at them. So they had to build holes to jump into, foxholes. We call them foxholes, but they were pits that they were digging as fast as they could to get in. And they needed help. So they called for the Buffalo Soldiers, and the Buffalo Soldiers arrived with 35 men. And they joined the group. This battle went on for 8 days. One of the Buffalo Soldiers crawled out and crawled down through the lines, and they were being shot at, and he got water out of the creek and brought them back to the injured. This soldier's name was Henry Johnson, and he won the Medal of Honor for that action. But they came in, and they were in the same position that the troops that came down from Fort Still were in. So finally, after 8 days, a group of 250 men came out of Fort Day Russell, and they were rescued. And that was the end of the Milk Creek situation. So that was one of those. And the other was the Battle of Beecher Island, which is out near Ray, Colorado. The Buffalo Soldiers under Captain Carpenter came in and rescued a group of men who had been down at the Rickery River for 9 days. And they had to shoot their mounts to hide under, to make breastwork out of. And they were rescued by the men of the 10th Cavalry. And Captain Carpenter won the Medal of Honor for that action. So those are some of the battles that they were in. I'd like to probably bring it to a close by saying that, and when I mean close, my close may be not like this, but like this. We want to talk about the way that the Buffalo Soldiers, or black Americans, served in the war. They've served in every war since the Revolutionary War. As a matter of fact, during the Revolutionary War, there were 5,000 black men who fought with George Washington. And one of these men brought his son with him when they went to battle, along with other men. And George Washington was getting ready to cross the Delaware. And when they came up to help George Washington join his group, he noticed that one of the guys was really young. And he said, "Son, how old are you?" And he said, "I'm 12 years old." And his name was Jocko Graves. And he said, he thought to himself, well, I like this kid's ambition. I like his willingness to go with us. But I'm not going to take a boy with me in the battle. So he said, "Jocko, I want you to stand here and hold our horses as we go across the river, across the Delaware." And he says, "And I want you to hold the lantern and stay with the horses and hold the lantern so we know where our horses are when we came back." And it started to snow a little bit. And so the men went to battle. And in a few hours, they came back. And they could find their horses because the light was on. And when they got back and they started to talk to Jocko, they found out that he had frozen to death, but he was still holding the horses. George Washington was so taken by that he had a statue made of young Jocko, and he put it on his estate in Mount Vernon. And today, you see that same little boy holding that lantern, but you saw it on a lot of plantations during the Civil War. That was a statue of Jocko Graves. No one knew what it meant, but they thought that it made a great lawn jockey. So that's what you see on all the plantations, on all a statue of Jocko Graves holding the lantern, not knowing what it was for. But during the Civil War, the people on the Underground Railroad realized that a lot of plantations had this statue of Jocko Graves there. So they would paint a green stripe around the arm of Jocko Graves. And that would tell them that that was a safe house on the Underground Railroad. But if it was a red stripe, don't go there. That's the legend of Jocko Graves. And we go on to the War of 1812. In the War of 1812, there were about 1,000 African Americans who fought in the War of 1812. Most of those were sailors. Thank you very much. The first man, I don't know, some of you know this or not, but the first person killed in the Revolutionary War was Crispus Attucks. And he was a black man in that group of protesters out during the Boston Massacre. And he was the first man killed, was Crispus Attucks. So all over the history books, you find these men. Then we talk about the 1812, 1,000 men. Then we go to the Civil War, and of course, there were 180,000 men. And over here, I have records of Mr. Walmsley. First name? John Walmsley. John Walmsley was related to my wife, and he was in the Civil War. As a matter of fact, he was at the Battle of the Crater, and that was in the Fredericksburg campaign. They lost so many soldiers that day in the Battle of the Crater that John Walmsley started the day out as a private, and at the end of the day, he was a sergeant because of the casualty rate. And I have his enlisted papers over here on the side. You can see those. I have a picture of Crispus Attucks. We have a picture also of some of our Negro Indian scouts over there. And I'd like to also introduce my wife, have her stand up a little bit. She's wearing what some of the non-commissioners officers' wives would wear if they were a sergeant or above. You could only be married if you were given permission by the commanding officer and you had to be a sergeant above. Now, my rank is that of regimental quartermaster sergeant. I'm the guy who controls everything. All the uniforms, all the horses, all the ammunition, everything. They've got to come to me to get a piece of bread. Now, I'm a little bit different than this guy right over here. He commands the troops, but he better be nice to me because he's going to be the chaps looking for a sergeant in the army. I'm a line person, I'm staff, he commands the troops. I have a higher rank than he does, but commanding the troops, that doesn't matter. And I wouldn't care because I would have the best house. I'd have the best quarters next to an officer because I get a chance, I controlled everything. During that time period, they did not have very many sergeants. So the regimental quartermaster was a little bit higher ranked than they would be ordinarily today because they didn't have that many sergeants. So he had more things that he had to control. And I even had to control the officers' horses. So if the officer needed a horse, he better be. Now he may like that bay horse over there with the 4 white socks. Sergeant, I want that bay horse with 4 white socks. Yes, sir. you got it. But if he's not nice, I'm going to give him a big horse with 4 white socks, but it's not the same one that he thought it was. So that's how we did that. Now then after the Civil War, we had the Spanish-American War. Now during the Spanish-American War, there were only 25,000 troops in the United States Army. And of those 25,000 troops, 2,500 of those were black, and they fought in the Spanish-American War. Now they only had one cavalry unit there, and that was the 10th Cavalry in the Spanish-American War. But they had the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th Infantry. They were also there during the Spanish-American War. Now these are black troops, not the Rough Riders. And so they fought during the Civil War, or Spanish-American War. Then from there, we go to World War I. And World War, they were there, but they kind of put the Philippine insurrection and the Spanish-American War close together because they were so close. They were 1900, 1901, so they kind of put that with the Spanish-American War. In World War I, there were 380,000 black troops who fought during the First World War. Now, during that time, the country was segregated. And the only way the 9th was going to go is if Charles Young, who was a colonel at that time, became a general. So John J. Pershing asked President Wilson if they could make Charles Young a general. And they refused because they said that he had been sick and that he was not physically fit. But he rode 250 miles on horseback to prove that he was physically fit. And he had been in charge of the men out in California. I can't think of that, the park that's out there now. What is that? Yosemite National Park. He was the commander of that group. They were the first Forest Rangers under Charles Young. But he couldn't go, so they didn't take the 9th, and they cashed it out of the Army. So the United States, when they came into war in World War I, they promised the French 4 regiments of soldiers. But they didn't want to commit 4 regiments of white soldiers to the French. So they committed 4 regiments of black soldiers. The 369th, the 370th, the 371st, and the 372nd. And the 369th, they were called the Harlem Hellfighters. They were on the front lines longer than any other. They were on the front lines for almost 200 days without relief on the front lines. A lot of them won the French Medal of Honor. But they got their fighters. Maybe not the ones they thought they were sending, but they got their fighters. And in World War II, there were over 1.5 million blacks in the service. And of course, you've been hearing about some of those now. The Red Tails. There were a lot of fighter pilots during that time period. There were a lot of black units, the 371st Tank Division, who got a unit citation. They captured 30 towns in Europe. The 381st was one of those tank divisions. What they did in 1944, they disbanded the Buffalo Soldiers. And one day they came in and they took their sabers. Then the next day they took their horses. And then they started to sending them around to different units. Some were sent to the Red Ball Express, the groups that carried the gas and ammunition to Patton as he going through Europe. They couldn't drive those trucks a lick. They practiced driving those trucks around the fields until they were able to drive them, and at first they had to go 30 miles an hour through the German lines. And after 4 or 5 of them had been shot down and blown up, the sergeant in charge said, you take anything that you can get your hands on and take that blank governor off that truck. And they flew down the road. And they started driving so fast they made a highway for them. And when they were coming, you better get out of the way because they were flat moving. So that was part of the Red Ball Express, and that's one of the units that they had. Now, I didn't talk about this particular item over here, and the sergeant doesn't have one on. This is a saber. It's 39.5 inches long, weighs about 4 pounds. This makes you cavalry. This is a saber and not a sword. A sword has 2 cutting edges, front and back. A saber only has 1. This one. It's curved. And the back is heavy because it's used for defense. This is offense, the cutting part. Defensive part is you use it to knock away a weapon. This makes you cavalry. Without this, you're not cavalry. But this is the primary weapon for the cavalryman. It never runs out of ammunition, never jams, never gets too hot to handle. That makes you cavalry. Now I guess we're open for questions. If I put this in there.
I did that last week on my own. Put it in there backwards, it didn't work.
All right, so I'm going to turn back over to Sergeant Applewrite, and we'll have to answer those questions.
Thank you, Sergeant Bell. One last tidbit. We've been talking about, and Sergeant Bell mentioned Young. We talked a lot about the Buffalo Soldiers. Well, there was this one soldier, I call him numero uno, number 1. He was born in 1865 in Gainesville, Georgia, born into slavery. In 1867, his father bought his freedom and moved him and his family to Atlanta, Georgia. And his father began a shoe company, repair shoes. Made enough money to send this young man to a private missionary school. And as he completed that time, he was able to go into the University of Atlanta. When he graduated from the University of Atlanta, he got an opportunity to go to West Point. He was the 5th African American to attend West Point. The other 4 prior to him were washed out. This young man's name was Henry O. Flipper. Henry was at West Point for 4 years. Very few people spoke to him other than his professors, but he didn't do it. William graduated 50 out of a class of 76. He was the first African American officer to graduate from West Point. Henry O. Flipper. Henry was court-martial in Oklahoma. He was assigned to the 10th Cavalry in Oklahoma, and while in Oklahoma, he created what is known today as Flipper's Ditch. It was the water that run through the fort to take away all the dirty water and nasty water to keep them healthy. Today, Flipper's Ditch is still there. In was it 1999? That's right. President Clinton, after doing the research, his niece doing the research, and discovering what everybody already knew, that Henry Flipper was set up. And President, what's his name now? Forget. Thank you. You know, when you get tired at 78, I'm 75. How old are you, honey? Oh, I'm 75. Sometimes your brain dead. Pardoned him and cleared his name. So keep in mind, the first African American to graduate from West Point was Henry O. Flipper. Now, the proud moment, the test. Who? You're also going to be testing me. Because if I didn't do my job, if you don't get at least 90% on my test, I'm a failure. All right, I was going to leave someone out. We have a surprise for you. We're going to have Miss Kathy Williams and Sergeant Dago returns to do some manual of arms rifle. I know we're running over, but we can go another 3 hours. We try to cut it short, but you can't. You start talking, you just can't.
Trooper, attention. Forward, march. Trooper, halt. Right face. Right face. Present arms. Carry arms. Parade rest. Carry arms. Order arms. In place, rest. Order, arm. Carry, arm. Forward, march. Trooper, halt. Dismiss.
That is a period example of rifle manual of arms. You notice the rifle's about that high. If you notice on the mounted horse, it's real short. Being that if you're on horseback and your rifle's down there, you be pulling it up like this, you get shot. So the scabbard for this is short. So you can get it out fast enough and shoot it. And the other issue with that is that rifle was hooked to this chain, the soldier's rifle here. So once you shoot it, you can drop it and then pull out your pistol and continue to fight. Now, are you ready for the test? Let's see, our next presentation is in Bird, Kansas. Oh, we're going all the way to Kansas and tell people how you failed this test in Broomfield. All right, first one. But before I get into that, I want to thank Mr. Meadows and this organization and all of you for giving us the opportunity to tell the story of those men who, for whatever reason, their story has been left out of the history book. First question. It's a geography question. What was the major river that these soldiers they call Buffalo Soldiers have to serve west of? Mississippi. Yeah, oh, Apple was a good teacher. You got one right. Second, this is an easy one. If you miss this one, I'm really going to be embarrassed. What was the name of that officer, that brilliant officer, who chose the 7th Cavalry over the 9th? Custer, all right. Third question. Can you give me one example of how these men they call Buffalo Soldiers got their name? Yeah, the hair between the horns of the buffalo resemble the hair on a soldier. I will show you, but I don't have any hair. Fourth question. Can you give me the name of the one and only documented female buffalo soldier? Kathy Williams. My God, you know what? I'm asked for a raise. The sixth question, you're only going to have two more. The sixth question. Can you name me one of the units that was created in 1866 by the federal government? African American unit. The 10th Cavalry. All right. Now, here's the bonus question. Most of you should get it, but you may not. Only 2 people's gotten 18 years, so you may not. Are you ready? Yes. It's a 4-part question. I tricked you, didn't I? You have to get all 4 points, but if you get 50%, I'll grade you on the curve. Are you ready? Sure, you're ready. You are ready.
We're ready.
Who am I?
Sergeant Fred Applewrite.
Almost.
First sergeant.
That's the first 2 pieces. What is it? She got it. First sergeant. What else? First sergeant. Da-da-da-da. There you go. Who said that? First sergeant Fred Applewrite. Oh, remember that name. All right. And the last question is one that I have a passion for. I hope that after this presentation today, that you know more and have a little more appreciation than for the Buffalo Soldiers than you did before you got here today. And if you did, we completed our mission. Thank you.
Fred, wait a minute, just stop. But on behalf of all of us, and certainly the museum, we'd like to give all your members here a challenge coin. I've given 2 of them out already, but this for you, John, and there's another too.
Well,
but thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
And again, please. Please come visit with all of them here, and we have so much interesting items up front. And stick around for our flag ceremony, which will be at noon. John, do you have something else?
Quick announcement, a phone, a smartphone, was found in the parking lot. It's hanging on the AED box on a lanyard. So anybody check, see if you missed a phone?
Probably me.
Marvelous.
Any question from you? Okay, John, come up here. Don't leave me by myself.
I'm going to grab the podium.
What's your question, ma'am?
When did they integrate the African American and the white troops?
When did they say they did it or when they really did it?
They really did.
They really did it when I was in 1968. That's when it was integrated. That was the Vietnam era. Prior to that, they said it was integrated, but anyway.
No.
Yes. Well, I got 3 of them real quick. What was the little boy's name again that was in the Revolutionary?
Jocko Graves.
Jocko. Okay, then as a cavalry unit, when you guys went out on campaign, woke up in the morning, and sergeant said, okay, let's go, guys. Did you each have your own horse assigned, or did you just go grab one? Did you have your own horse?
You had your horse assigned and better be in good shape.
Okay.
Because if it didn't and it wasn't, you couldn't go. God knows for you.
Okay, and then I want to real quickly. The Old West military, 10th Cavalry, whatever. When you guys got when you had 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and you said, I'm done, I'm gonna retire. Did you get any voluntary retirement?
They did, they gave you $2 if you're doing this, but you had to be in there for, 5 years, and after 5 years, you may get a strike.
Okay.
So if you had 3 strikes, probably, you'd probably been there 8, 9, 10, maybe 15 years.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Yes.
Back to the Spanish-American War, and Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders went up San Juan Hill. There were 2 pictures. The real picture had the Rough Riders in the middle and the U.S. 10th Cavalry on both sides. The picture that went to the newspapers was just the Rough Riders.
Oh.
In reality, the 10th Cavalry did all the fighting and all the dying. And then, when things settled down, Roosevelt rode up to the top, unscathed, to take the honors. Do you have any information on that?
I know that, and when they got back to New York, and they got off the ships, he never mentioned anything about the tent. They went one way, and he went up the other. Yes.
Sir, where do you take your presentations and how are they received from the public?
Usually, we take them all over the United States. We've talked to almost 1 million people. We've been in existence for almost 40 years. And I've had over 200 men in the unit. But I can tell you right now, the guys that I have in my unit right now are the best that I've ever had. Because they understand what we're doing, finally. You have to have a goal, and you have to have a picture. They understand what the goal is. It's not about us. It's never been about us individually. It's about who we represent, and they understand that.
How many men in your unit?
There are 25, plus 25 other people that make us go that are not Buffalo soldiers, but the wives of the Buffalo soldiers. We truck drivers that have to drive vehicles and those kinds of things. So probably there are about 30 people that really make it go. There are 25 mounted people. We have 25 because that's all our trailer can carry. We don't carry 12 mounted guys, 12 mounted soldiers and all their equipment at one time in a trailer. So we only perform with, at max, 10 guys, and most of the time 8 to 6. Depends on the size of the show. Yes.
So when do you do the events where you do the performances and where?
When are we gonna do that?
Yes.
We're gonna be in Bird City, Kansas. I don't wanna be over Bird City, Kansas.
I do.
Oh, the other day? Well, they're going to have, do they have any hotels there? No. Well,
Back in the tents again.
There won't be Bird City stand that night. But we're going to do a 2-day show there, and they're having a tri-state tractor convention.
Oh, well.
And so there'll be a lot of people there that weekend, and we're doing 2 shows there. Probably 2 shows each day. And it never dawned on me that on the 29th and 30th of July, it's gonna be 100 degrees. And yes, we do wear these wool uniforms.
Yeah.
Question back there.
How long were they at Fort Larned? Larned's in Kansas. Sure you know that.
Yeah,
What's that?
We've been there.
I said it was Fort Larned.
Oh, Larned, they were there just for a couple of years. It depends on, the troops were there about a year or so, and they were moved on.
Because they protected the Santa Fe Trail.
Right, it goes right through there.
Yes.
But I try to talk about Colorado and not Kansas. I did talk a little bit about New Mexico, but their job was to guard the Santa Fe Trail. That's what the soldiers were. Remember, everything out here in West was under martial law. They were here before there were towns. So there were no deputy sheriffs, there was no county sheriffs. There was Buffalo soldiers under martial law. Yes?
2 questions. One is, about how many presentations or shows do you put on a year? And 2 is, I don't think we got a website that or else I would have added it to the brochure, but do you have a website that lists
Yeah,
all
we
your...
have one, but it doesn't work at this time.
Okay.
We can't get all this, but we're sure we're gonna get that taken care of in a month or so.
Oh, that one, it just don't work.
There is one.
You gotta keep it updated.
So about how many events or discussions like
Well-
this, or do you guys do it yearly?
Well, see what happens, and I'm gonna pass the buck here a little bit. We get all the dates in, he controls all of the horses in the unit. I do most of the other things, but when it comes to the men and the horses, that's his job. I don't deal with that. And I always call him to make sure that we have enough guys to do a performance. And I looked at the calendar this year, and there are 20 performances on it. And I'm going, you know, Fred, I think you screwed up.
It's hard to say no.
Yeah.
When you're so excited about telling the story. Who's gonna be there? All right, we're going. It really depends on, most of our troopers work. So before I totally confirm it and tell John it's on, I had to check with those to see if we got enough troopers who's on work that particular day. So we'll have enough to put on the performance.
Okay.
Now, what he really left out is that the young guys ride the horses, and we do other things.
Yeah.
As you should. I used to train all the horses for the unit when I was a little bit younger. And I'm a little bit older now.
What was the first year that they allowed blacks to be officers?
1877, when Flipper graduated, that was the first officer. First officer.
Well,
Yes.
The great experiment called the bicycle corps is also made up of buffalo soldiers. Is that in any of your presentations?
We don't talk about them because we talk about cavalry and their infantry.
Yeah.
Okay? Yes.
When you all, how many men were part of the 9th and 10th Cavalry Regiment? And when they went out on a campaign or reconnaissance, did they have pack wagons as well?
They did when they took a regiment out.
Yeah.
Or when they took more than 2 or 3 companies.
Okay.
They took a battalion out, and
Okay.
they didn't have a wagon. Usually on scouting, they'd have probably 10 or 15 men with them. What would be in a particular troop. And they leave some of those at home because some of those were on sick call.
Okay.
And so they had an incident where one of the sergeants said, they called for the cavalry, shows up with 10 guys. And they go, well, where's the rest of the cavalry? He said, we're here. He said, we have a battle that we're gonna prepare for. He said, yeah, got 1 troop. 1 battle, 1 troop. But during that time period, before they took them away, those soldiers carried Spencer rifles. They were automatic weapons. And so if your call had 10 guys out and they carried 70 rounds with them, you had quite a fighting force with you. And most of the Buffalo soldiers were the foot marchers because of a guy by the name of Guy B. Henry, who was a white officer. And he figured out, now if these guys are going to be protecting me, they better know how to shoot. And so he took it upon himself to teach these men how to become a foot marcher. And most of them won the rival competitions during that time period.
Thank you.
Yes. When the 10th job was to safeguard the Santa Fe Trail, how far did they range on either side of that trail?
Well, they went from Fort Lyons down to Raton Pass. And that's probably, I don't know, 100 miles, 150 miles. It depends on where you go. You know, I priced about 100 miles or so. And they went from, from Fort Lyons, the next post was at Fort Dallas, which is in Kansas. That came down, our Fort Larned, which were close to each other, and they protected Santa Fe Trail.
Did they range up into Wyoming at all, or?
Well, just that group in Santa Fe Trail. Yeah, they had soldiers in Wyoming. They had them down, they had them all over. But they may have, I have a record of troops, they may have 2 companies here, 1 company over there, 2 others over there. Depends on where the major problems were. They said most troops are problems. Question, yes?
So does your bugler still use that bugle?
Well, right now, we don't have a bugle right now. But I'll tell you one thing, if I can find somebody who can bugle that and play that horn, I'll guarantee gain some track right away. Now, I want everyone to know, this group is not all black. Because during that time period, there were other nationalities who were buffalo soldiers. Some Mexican, had some Mexican soldiers, and some white soldiers were buffalo soldiers. Because don't forget, they could join the buffalo soldiers, but we couldn't join any of them.
Right, right.
So we always say, they're not all black, not 100% black, there are a few other nationalities. And they have specific.
John, one more question, because
Yes.
we're going to have to finish off to get ready for the flag retirement ceremony, but go ahead.
Oh, well, thank you. All I was gonna say is I see a strong resemblance between the Buffalo Soldiers and the Tuskegee Airmen on how they
Well,
got
sure.
started. Because when the Buffalo Soldiers got started, they were given, less than wonderful, equipment or weapons or whatever, just that weren't befitting the regular white army, okay, so they gave it to them, and I see a lot of similarities with the Tuskegee Airmen. They were given ill equipment and weapons and whatever, and both the Buffalo Soldiers and the Tuskegee Airmen prevailed. They came through, they hit it out of the ballpark, okay, in spite of their
What reason they did a pretty good job because they didn't quite understand when they volunteered what was going to happen to them. Because during the Civil War, if they were captured, they were killed. And so this wasn't still knowing. And so they couldn't afford to fail. They had to do the best job they could. And they were harder on their men internally than they were outside. That's first sergeant was God. You know, if you screw it up, you had to deal with him.
So that's God over there.
And you better make, well, it's like in any army. The first sergeant's the guy that's gonna tell you what to do. And you better do it.
Okay, well, thank you very much.